The sun cast long shadows across the parched main street of White River, Wyoming, as Zara Blackett stumbled toward the communal well, her worn boots kicking up dust that settled on her threadbare dress. It was 1876, and the Western Territory was unforgiving to those without means, especially a woman alone with nothing but an empty wooden bucket and desperate hope. Zara's hands trembled as she approached the well at the center of town. 3 months since her father's passing had left her destitute, the small ranch they'd worked together now claimed by the bank. At 22, with no family and few skills beyond ranching, she had been reduced to begging for the most basic of necessities: water. "Look who's back," sneered Martha Wilcox, the shopkeeper's wife, her plump arms folded across her chest as she stood with several other well-dressed women. "Come to beg for more charity, have you?" Zara kept her eyes fixed on the worn wooden rim of the well. "Please," she said, her voice barely audible, "I just need water. And we need paying customers, not beggars cluttering up our town," replied Alina Foster, the banker's wife, her nose wrinkling with distaste. "White River isn't a place for those who can't fend for themselves." The sting of their words hurt more than the ache in Zara's empty stomach. She'd gone 2 days without proper food, surviving on wild berries gathered from the outskirts of town. Her small shack, the last remnant of her family's property the bank had yet to claim, had no working well of its own. "I can work," Zara offered, though she'd made this plea many times before. "I can clean, cook, tend animals. Nobody wants to hire Josiah Blackett's daughter," Martha cut her off. "Your father was a drunk and a debtor. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree." Zara bit her lip until she tasted blood. Her father had been neither of those things until her mother's death from fever 2 years prior. Grief had changed him, but not the way these women claimed. They had never known him as she had. "I just need water," she repeated, extending her bucket with trembling hands. Alina stepped forward, deliberately knocking the bucket from Zara's grasp. It clattered onto the hard, packed dirt. "Get your water from the creek like the other animals," she hissed. "This well belongs to respectable folk." The women's laughter cut through Zara like a knife. She knelt to retrieve her bucket, tears threatening to spill from her eyes as dusty fingers closed around the wooden handle. A shadow fell across her, blocking the harsh afternoon sun. The women's laughter abruptly ceased. "Ladies," a deep voice drawled above her. "Is there a problem here?" Zara looked up into the face of a stranger. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore the dust of the trail on his clothes and a weathered Stetson pulled low over piercing blue eyes. His face, tanned and lined from the sun, was framed by dark blonde hair that curled slightly at his collar. A revolver hung at his hip, and behind him, a chestnut mare stood patiently, loaded with the gear of a man who lived in the saddle. "No problem at all, sir," Martha stammered, her demeanor instantly transforming. "Just explaining to this woman that the well has certain standards." The stranger's eyes never left Zara's face. Without a word, he bent down and took the bucket from her hands, his calloused fingers brushing against hers. The simple touch sent an unexpected warmth through her cold limbs. "Last I checked," he said as he straightened up, "water belongs to no one and everyone." He turned toward the well. "And I've crossed 40 miles of hard country today. Reckon both my horse and I could use a drink along with this lady here." Alina stepped forward. "You don't understand, sir. This woman name's Kincaid O'Malley," he interrupted, tipping his hat. "Just rode and looking for work. And what I understand is a person's asking for water on a hot day." He dropped the bucket into the well, the rope sliding through his tanned hands. The women exchanged glances, suddenly unsure. A new man in town, especially one who looked capable with the gun on his hip, was someone to be cautious around. "Well, Mr. O'Malley," Martha said with a forced smile, "welcome to White River. I'm sure my husband could point you toward some ranch work. The Hawkins place is always looking for experienced hands." Kincaid nodded but kept working the well, drawing up the now filled bucket. Water sloshed over the sides as he set it on the edge of the well. "Much obliged for the information," he said, but his attention remained on Zara. He offered a hand to help her up from the dirt. "And your name, Miss?" "Zara," she said softly, placing her hand in his as she rose. "Zara Blackett." A A flicker of recognition crossed his face at her surname, but he showed no other reaction. Instead, he handed her the full bucket. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Blackett." He tipped his hat again. "Seems we both arrived just in time for a drink." The women, sensing their entertainment was over, drifted away with whispered comments and backward glances. "Thank you," Zara said, clutching the precious bucket of water. "But you shouldn't have. They'll talk about you now." Kincaid shrugged, his lips quirking into a half-smile that transformed his weathered face. "Been talked about in better towns than this, Miss Blackett. Words don't leave bullets or knife wounds, so I pay them little mind." He drew another bucket and led his mare forward to drink. The horse gratefully lowered her head to the water. "Beautiful animal," Zara commented, genuine admiration in her voice. Growing up on a ranch, she'd always had a way with horses. "This is Penny," Kincaid said, patting the mare's neck. "Been together 5 years now. She's got more sense than most people I meet." He studied Zara openly now, taking in her thin frame and the dark circles under her eyes. "You live far from here. That's a heavy bucket to carry any distance." Zara hesitated, unaccustomed to kindness from strangers. "Just outside town, a small place." Kincaid nodded, as if making a decision. "I'd be obliged if you'd point me toward the livery. After that, perhaps I could help you carry that water home." "I couldn't ask. You didn't ask. I offered." His voice was firm but gentle. "And truth be told, I could use some information about this town if I'm going to be looking for work here. Seems you might know who to trust and who to avoid." The logic of his request made it easier for her pride to accept. "The livery is just down the street," she said, pointing. "Old man Tucker runs it. He's fair, unlike some in this town." They walked together, Penny's hooves making a steady rhythm behind them. Zara was acutely aware of the stares from the citizens of White River. A woman in her position, walking alongside a handsome stranger, would set tongues wagging for days. But for the first time in months, Zara found she didn't care what they thought. The weight of the water bucket was nothing compared to the weight that had lifted from her heart at this simple act of kindness. At the livery, Hank Tucker emerged from the shadowy interior, wiping his hands on a rag. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Zara, but showed no judgment. "Afternoon, miss," he said with a nod before turning to Kincaid. "Looking for boarding?" "For a few days at least," Kincaid confirmed, handing over Penny's reins. "Good feed and a rub-down, if you please. She's earned it." After settling arrangements with Tucker, Kincaid returned to Zara's side and took the water bucket from her. "Lead the way, Miss Blackett." They walked in companionable silence away from the main street, the sounds of the town gradually fading behind them. Zara led him down a narrow dirt path that wound through scrubby brush toward a small, weather-beaten shack set against a backdrop of gnarled cottonwood trees. "It's not much," she said apologetically as they approached. Kincaid surveyed the humble dwelling with respectful eyes. "A roof and walls are more than many have out here." The shack was indeed small, just one room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, a table with 2 mismatched chairs, and a few shelves holding meager provisions. But despite its simplicity, it was clean, and the small window had curtains made from what appeared to be an old dress. Kincaid set the bucket down near the fireplace. "You live here alone?" Zara nodded, suddenly self-conscious about the poverty of her surroundings. "Since my father passed. The bank took most of our land, but they let me keep this. For now." Kincaid's jaw tightened at that, but he said nothing. "I can offer you tea," Zara said, gesturing to the small pot hanging near the fireplace. "It's the least I can do to thank you." "I'd be grateful," he replied, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. As Zara busied herself with the tea, Kincaid took in more details of her home. On a small shelf sat a few books unusual for a frontier cabin, and beside them, a daguerreotype of a man and woman standing proudly before a much larger house, a small girl between them. "Your parents?" he asked gently. Zara glanced up and nodded. "Before the war. We had a good-sized ranch then." "What happened?" The question was soft, without demand. Zara's hands stilled on the teapot. It had been so long since anyone had asked or cared about her story. "My father went to fight for the Union, came back changed like many did. Still, we managed, built the ranch back up. Then my mother took fever 2 years ago." Her voice grew quieter. "Father was never the same after." When the drought came last year, we couldn't make the payments. His heart gave out 3 months ago working in the fields. Kincaid's face showed genuine sympathy without pity. I'm sorry, Miss Blackett. Losing family is the hardest trail a person walks. The simple understanding in his words touched something in Zara. She blinked back tears as she handed him a chipped cup of tea. Thank you, she said, and they both knew she meant for more than just the water or his kind words. They sat in the doorway of the shack, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in brilliant oranges and purples. For Zara, it was the first moment of peace she'd known in months, the simple comfort of human companionship without judgment. What brought you to White River, Mr. O'Malley? She asked finally. Kincaid, he corrected gently. And the usual, work, new horizons. He sipped his tea before adding, and maybe making good on some promises. Before she could ask what he meant, he stood and dusted off his pants. I should get back to town before full dark. Thank you for the tea, Miss Blackett. Zara, she offered in return, and thank you again. He settled his hat back on his head and nodded. I'll be around for a while, Zara. If those women or anyone else gives you trouble at the well again, you let me know. With that, he turned and walked back toward town, his silhouette growing smaller against the darkening sky. Zara watched until he disappeared around the bend, a strange new feeling flickering in her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. The next morning, Zara woke to the sound of a wagon approaching her shack. Wary, she peered through the window to see Kincaid driving a borrowed farm wagon. He pulled up and jumped down from the seat with the easy grace of a man accustomed to hard work. Morning, he called as she opened the door. Hope I'm not disturbing you too early. Not at all, she replied, pushing a strand of dark hair behind her ear. Is something wrong? Nothing wrong. Just an offer, he gestured to the wagon. I've taken on work at the Hawkins Ranch, good pay, and they need help with everything from horses to cooking. I mentioned I knew someone who might be interested in kitchen work, and Mrs. Hawkins was eager to meet you. Zara stared at him in disbelief. You found me work, he shrugged, though his eyes watched her carefully. Found us both work. The Hawkins have a small cabin for married hands, but since I'm single, I'm in the bunkhouse. Made me think their kitchen cabin might suit you better than this place, especially with winter coming. The possibility of steady work and proper shelter made Zara's heart race, but caution tempered her excitement. Why would they hire me? Everyone in town knows the Blackett name is mud. Kincaid's smile was wry. Turns out the Hawkins don't much care for town gossip. They judge people on their merits, not rumors. Besides, they're short-handed since their last cook left for California, told them you could cook and weren't afraid of hard work. But we only just met. How can you be sure I can cook? She asked, both touched and bewildered by his faith in her. You made tea without burning it, he said with a teasing glint in his eye. And anyone who keeps a place this clean with so little to work with can surely manage a ranch kitchen. Zara hesitated only a moment longer before nodding decisively. Let me gather my things. It didn't take long. Her possessions, a few clothes, her mother's wooden hairbrush, the daguerreotype, and 3 precious books fit easily into a small trunk that Kincaid lifted into the wagon as if it weighed nothing. As they drove away from the shack that had been both prison and sanctuary these last difficult months, Zara couldn't help looking back. I never thought I'd leave, she admitted. Sometimes the hardest step is the first one away from what we know, even if what we know is hurting us, Kincaid said quietly, his eyes on the road ahead. The Hawkins Ranch lay 7 miles outside White River, a sprawling operation with good grazing land, a large main house, several outbuildings, and corrals filled with quality horses. As they approached, Zara's nervousness grew. It had been so long since she'd been given a chance by anyone. Sarah Hawkins met them at the door, a sturdy woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes that evaluated Zara without judgment. So you're Josiah Blackett's girl, she said after introductions were made. I knew your father years ago, before the war, good man with horses. Zara swallowed hard. Yes, madam, he was. Sarah nodded as if confirming something to herself. Kincaid tells me you need work and a roof. I need help in my kitchen and someone to take over when my hands get too stiff for kneading dough. Seems we might solve each other's problems. I'm a hard worker, Zara promised, And I can cook, clean, mend. Sarah waved away her words. I'll be the judge of what you can do, 2 weeks trial. If we suit each other, you stay on with room, board, and wages. If not, no hard feelings. It was more than fair. More than Zara had dared hope for. Thank you, Mrs. Hawkins. I won't disappoint you. See that you don't, the older woman replied, but there was a softening around her eyes. Now come see your quarters. The kitchen cabin was small but sturdy, with a bedroom just big enough for a bed and trunk. The main room held a large cook stove, work tables, and shelves stocked with more provisions than Zara had seen in one place since before her father died. It was connected to the main house by a covered walkway, allowing the cook to work without being exposed to the elements when bringing meals to the family. Previous cook was a bachelor, Sarah explained, but it should suit a single woman just fine, more privacy than the main house. It's perfect, Zara breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wooden countertop. Good, get settled in. Kitchen tour after lunch, which my daughter-in-law is handling today. You start tomorrow at dawn. After Sarah left, Zara turned to find Kincaid leaning against the doorframe, watching her with a warm expression that made her cheeks heat. Thank you, she said, the words inadequate for the gift he'd given her, not just work and shelter, but dignity. No need for thanks, he replied. Mrs. Hawkins is getting the better end of this deal. Wait till she tastes your cooking. Zara laughed, a sound so foreign to her own ears that it startled her. You still don't know if I can cook. His answering smile reached all the way to his eyes. I guess we'll all find out together. He straightened, settling his hat more firmly on his head. I'd better get to the stables. Mr. Hawkins wants me working with a new stallion they just bought. Be careful, she said automatically, then blushed at her presumption. His expression softened. Always am. He tipped his hat and was gone, leaving Zara standing in what felt like the first ray of sunshine after a very long winter. The next weeks passed in a blur of hard work and gradual healing. The Hawkins ranch ran like a well-oiled machine, with everyone from the owners to the youngest stable boy pulling their weight. Zara rose before dawn each day to start breakfast for the family and the ranch hands. By the time the sun crested the horizon, the kitchen was filled with the aroma of coffee, biscuits, and whatever main dish she'd prepared, from flapjacks to eggs and ham. To her surprise and relief, her cooking met with universal approval. Even gruff old Mr. Hawkins, who reportedly had complained about the previous cook for 5 straight years, gave his silent endorsement by cleaning his plate at every meal. Sarah Hawkins proved to be a fair employer and, increasingly, a mentor. She taught Zara the rhythm of the ranch's needs, how to plan meals that sustained hard-working men through long days, how to preserve the garden's bounty for winter, how to stretch provisions when necessary without anyone feeling deprived. And then there was Kincaid. Though their paths crossed mainly at mealtimes, when he would take his place at the long table with the other hands, Zara found her eyes drawn to him more often than she cared to admit. He had quickly proven his worth to the Hawkins, showing a remarkable way with even the most difficult horses. The new stallion, a magnificent black thoroughbred with a mean streak, had been gentled under his patient hands when others had failed. Sometimes in the evenings, if his duties allowed, he would stop by the kitchen as she finished cleaning up after supper. They would share coffee and conversation, learning each other's stories in small, precious increments. She learned he was 30, born in Boston to Irish immigrants who had died in a tenement fire when he was 16. He'd headed west afterward, working his way across the country as a cowhand, sometimes a scout, occasionally a lawman when circumstances demanded. He spoke little of the past 10 years, but the scars visible on his hands and forearms told of a life that hadn't been easy. In turn, she shared more about her childhood on the ranch, her mother's love of books that had given Zara her own passion for reading, her father's patient lessons in horsemanship and ranching. She even spoke of the dark days after her father's death, when the town that had once respected the Blackett name turned its back on her. I don't understand how people can be so cruel to their neighbors, she confessed one evening as they sat on the porch steps of her cabin, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. Kincaid was silent for a moment, his profile strong against the darkening sky. People fear what might happen to them. Seeing someone fall from prosperity to poverty reminds them how fragile their own position might be, so they turn away, tell themselves it could never happen to them because they're somehow better. The insight surprised her. You've thought about this. He nodded, his eyes distant. I've seen it in towns across the West, the best and worst of human nature side by side. He glanced at her, his expression softening. But I've also seen how strength can grow from hardship, like wildflowers pushing through stone. The compliment warmed her more than the coffee in her hands. In these quiet moments together, something was growing between them, tender and unspoken, but as real as the ground beneath their feet. October arrived with its crisp mornings and golden afternoons. Zara had been at the ranch for almost 2 months, her position now secure, her presence accepted as a natural part of the ranch's life. Her body had filled out from regular meals, and color had returned to her cheeks. The woman who had once begged for water at the town well was transforming into someone stronger, someone who smiled more easily and held her head higher. The ranch was preparing for its annual harvest festival, a tradition where neighboring ranchers and their families gathered to celebrate the end of summer work before winter set in. For days, Zara had been baking pies and breads, preparing hams and sides of beef for roasting, and organizing the kitchen girls who had been hired temporarily to help with the feast. The morning of the festival dawned clear and cool. Zara had been up since 4, ensuring everything was on schedule. By noon, wagons began arriving, carrying families from ranches near and far. Tables were set up in the large meadow beside the main house, decorated with autumn leaves and late-blooming wildflowers gathered by Sarah's grandchildren. As Zara directed the setting out of food, she spotted a familiar wagon approaching. Her stomach clenched as she recognized Martha Wilcox and Eleanor Foster among the passengers, along with their husbands. The banker, Harold Foster, was in business with the Hawkins, which explained their invitation. But seeing the women who had mocked her at the well brought a flood of uncomfortable memories. She was arranging a platter of sliced ham when Martha's voice carried across the serving table. "Well, if it isn't the beggar girl playing at being a cook," she said, loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "I do hope you washed your hands before touching the food, dear." Zara stiffened but kept her focus on her work, determined not to let the woman ruin the day. Eleanor joined in with a stage whisper. "I'm surprised Sarah Hawkins would risk her reputation hiring someone of such questionable character. Ladies," came a calm voice behind them, "your husbands are looking for you by the cider barrel." Kincaid stood there, his usual work clothes replaced by a clean shirt and vest, his hair damp from a recent washing. His expression was pleasant, but Zara recognized the steel beneath his polite tone. Martha's face flushed. "Mr. O'Malley, how nice to see you again. Will you be joining us at our table? I believe Mr. Hawkins has seating arranged," he replied smoothly, "but I'm sure your husbands would appreciate your company now." The dismissal was clear. With tight smiles and backward glances, the women moved away. Kincaid stepped closer to the serving table, his voice low. "Don't let them diminish you, Zara. They aren't worth a minute of your worry." She met his eyes, finding strength in their steady blue depths. "I know, I'm not the same woman they mocked at the well." "No," he agreed, his gaze warm with admiration. "You're not." The festival proceeded without further incident, the food receiving enthusiastic praise from the guests. As the afternoon waned into evening, lanterns were lit around the meadow, and a group of ranch hands produced fiddles and guitars. The music started slow, then picked up tempo as couples began to dance on the packed earth in front of the musicians. Zara watched from the sidelines, content to see the joy on people's faces after all her hard work. She was surprised when Kincaid appeared at her side, extending his hand. "May I have this dance?" he asked, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. She hesitated. "I haven't danced in years." "Neither have I," he confessed. "We can remember together." With that simple invitation, she placed her hand in his, allowing him to lead her to the makeshift dance floor. His arm circled her waist, strong and secure, as they joined the other couples in a lively reel. Whatever skills they might have forgotten came back quickly, their bodies finding the rhythm of the music and each other with surprising ease. As they danced, Zara was vaguely aware of stares, some curious, some disapproving, but for once she didn't care. The joy of movement, of Kincaid's hand warm in hers, of belonging somewhere again, overwhelmed any concern for gossip. When the music shifted to a slower waltz, Kincaid drew her closer. The propriety of such closeness might have been questionable in a city ballroom, but here under the stars, with the scent of autumn in the air and the music swirling around them, it felt perfectly right. "You're beautiful when you smile," he said softly, his words for her alone. The compliment caught her off guard. "Thank you," she managed, suddenly aware of how his eyes had darkened in the lantern light. "I've wanted to tell you that since the day at the well," he continued, his voice deepening, "but it didn't seem right then. You had enough to worry about without some dusty cowboy complicating things." Her heart quickened at his words. "And now," his hand tightened slightly at her waist, "now I think maybe we both deserve a chance at happiness, if you're willing." Before she could respond, a commotion broke out near the drinks table. Harold Foster's voice rose above the music, slurred with too much whiskey. "I'm telling you, that Blackett girl's got no business being here among decent folk." He was saying loudly to Daniel Hawkins, the ranch owner's eldest son. "Her father was a drunk who died owing me money. She's cut from the same cloth." Zara froze in Kincaid's arms, the joy of the moment shattered. She felt him tense, ready to intervene, but Daniel Hawkins was already responding, his voice carrying clearly. "That's enough, Foster. Miss Blackett is an employee of this ranch and a guest at our table. I suggest you remember whose land you're standing on." Foster, red-faced and swaying, pointed an unsteady finger. "You don't know what you've let onto your property." Her father was one of the finest horsemen in the territory before grief took him down," interrupted a new voice, Sarah Hawkins, stepping forward with the authority of her position as the ranch matriarch. "And his daughter has more dignity and work ethic than you're showing right now, Harold Foster. If you can't be civil, you and your party can leave." A hush fell over the gathering as everyone waited for Foster's response. His wife tugged urgently at his sleeve, obviously mortified. After a tense moment, he mumbled what might have been an apology and allowed himself to be led away toward their wagon. The music slowly resumed, but the spell of the evening had been broken. Zara gently pulled away from Kincaid. "I should check on the dessert table," she said, needing a moment to compose herself. He released her reluctantly, understanding in his eyes. "I'll be here when you're ready." She made her way to the far edge of the celebration, where tables of pies and cakes awaited the guests. But instead of stopping there, she continued walking until she reached a large cottonwood tree at the edge of the meadow. In its shadow, she leaned against the rough bark and took a deep breath, trying to steady her emotions. It wasn't long before she heard footsteps approaching. She didn't need to turn to know it was Kincaid. "You didn't have to follow me," she said as he came to stand beside her. "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "Are you all right?" She nodded slowly. "I'm just tired of being defined by my father's troubles, of carrying a reputation I never earned." "You know the Hawkins don't see you that way," he said gently, "and neither do I." She turned to face him, finding sincerity in his expression. "How do you see me, Kincaid?" The directness of her question seemed to catch him off guard, but only for a moment. He reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch featherlight. "I see a woman who faced the worst life could throw at her and didn't break," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "A woman with more courage and grace than those who judged her could ever understand. A woman who makes me want to be worthy of her regard." The simple honesty of his words touched something deep inside her. Before she could lose her nerve, Zara rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. For a heartbeat, he remained still, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. Then his arms encircled her, drawing her closer as he returned her kiss with a gentleness that made her heart ache. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since I first saw you at the well," he admitted. She smiled, surprised by her own boldness, even covered in dust and desperate, especially then. His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone. "You had a fire in your eyes even when asking for help. I knew then you were someone special." A call from the direction of the feast interrupted them. Sarah, looking for Zara to help serve the desserts. With reluctance, they moved apart. "We should get back," Zara said, though she made no immediate move to leave the shelter of the tree. Kincaid nodded but caught her hand before she could step away. "Zara, what I was trying to say before, about deserving happiness, I meant it." She squeezed his hand, a promise in the gesture. "So did I." As they walked back to join the celebration, Zara felt a new lightness in her heart. The path ahead wasn't clear yet, but for the first time in years, the future held more promise than fear. November brought the first dusting of snow to the Hawkins Ranch. The harvest festival was a month behind them, and life had settled into a winter rhythm. The ranch hands focused on keeping livestock fed and sheltered, mending equipment, and preparing for the harsher weather to come. For Zara and Kincaid, the changing season had brought changes of a more personal nature. Their growing relationship was conducted with the discretion appropriate to their positions at the ranch, but it wasn't a secret. Sarah Hawkins had pulled Zara aside one morning to say simply, "He's a good man. Don't let the past keep you from happiness." They found moments together when work allowed walks in the crisp evening air, coffee by the kitchen fire after the household retired, occasional rides to check the furthest pastures when Kincaid could justify bringing her along to assess winter provisions. It was during one such ride, with the mountains sharp and clear against the pale December sky, that Kincaid reined his horse to a stop at a ridge overlooking a small valley. "What do you think of this piece of land?" he asked as Zara pulled up beside him. She surveyed the valley below a creek running through good grazing land, sheltered on two sides by gentle slopes covered with pine and aspen. "It's beautiful. Reminds me a bit of our ranch when I was a child." He nodded, a curious expression on his face. "That's what I thought when I first saw it." "Does it belong to the Hawkins?" she asked, assuming this was part of their range she hadn't seen before. "No." He shifted in his saddle to face her more directly. "It belongs to me, or it will once the paperwork is finalized next week." Zara stared at him in surprise. "You bought land when?" "How?" His smile was both nervous and proud. "I've been saving for years, moving from job to job, putting away every extra cent. I always knew I wanted my own place eventually." He paused, looking out over the valley again. "There's good water, enough timber for building, and the grazing rights extend further than you can see from here." Understanding slowly dawned on her. "This is why you came to White River. You were looking for land." He nodded. "I'd heard this parcel might be available. The previous owner died without heirs, and the county was selling it off for back taxes." His eyes met hers, suddenly serious. "But finding the land turned out to be only part of why I stayed." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but clear. Zara's heart raced as she considered what he might be saying. "It needs work," he continued, gesturing toward a clearing near the creek. "The old cabin is barely standing and there's no barn to speak of, but by spring, with some help." He trailed off, watching her face carefully. "Kincaid," she said softly, "are you asking me something?" He urged his horse closer to hers, reaching across to take her gloved hand. "I'm asking if you might consider a future here, with me." His voice grew more confident as he continued. "I know it's not much yet, but we could build something good, something that's ours." Zara looked from his earnest face to the valley below, trying to absorb the enormity of what he was proposing. After so much loss and struggle, the possibility of a new beginning, a home that was truly hers again, with a man she had come to love, seemed almost too much to hope for. "Are you sure?" she asked, needing his certainty to anchor her own swirling emotions. "I don't bring much to this partnership except hard work and a tarnished family name." His laugh was warm in the cold air. "Zara Blackett, you bring everything that matters: strength, kindness, determination, and the best biscuits west of the Mississippi." His expression sobered. "As for names, I was hoping you might consider taking mine instead." The directness of his proposal stole her breath. "Are you asking me to marry you, Kincaid O'Malley?" "I am," he confirmed, his blue eyes never leaving hers. "Not very elegantly, I'm afraid, but with all my heart." A joy she had almost forgotten could exist welled up inside her. "Then my answer is yes." His smile blazed like the sun breaking through clouds as he leaned across the space between their horses to kiss her a seal on their promise, a beginning of their future. They were married 2 weeks later in the Hawkins front parlor, with Sarah standing in as Zara's family and Daniel Hawkins as Kincaid's best man. The ranch hands crowded in the doorway, offering good-natured teasing and genuine congratulations. The town minister performed the ceremony, and if he was surprised to be joining the mysterious newcomer Cowboy with the once destitute Blackett girl, he showed no sign of it. Zara wore a dress Sarah had insisted on giving her blue merino wool that matched Kincaid's eyes. He stood tall in a new suit, his usual weathered confidence momentarily softened by the solemnity of the occasion. When they spoke their vows, the words echoed with promise in the quiet room. As the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Kincaid drew her into his arms for a kiss that sealed their covenant and drew whoops of approval from the assembled ranch hands. The wedding feast that followed was Zara's own creation, prepared in the days before with help from the ranch women. As they celebrated late into the evening, she found herself watching her new husband across the room, still hardly believing the turn her life had taken. "He looks at you like you hung the moon," Sarah said, coming to stand beside her. Zara smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. "I still don't quite understand how this happened. 6 months ago, I was begging for water, barely surviving." Sarah patted her hand. "Life changes in an instant, for good or ill. The trick is recognizing the good when it comes and holding on tight." She nodded toward Kincaid, who was making his way toward them through the crowd. "That's a good man there. Reminds me of my Robert when we were young." Before Zara could respond, Kincaid reached them, slipping an arm around her waist. "Mrs. O'Malley," he said, the new title sending a thrill through her. "May I have this dance, always," she replied, allowing him to lead her to the center of the room, where furniture had been pushed aside to create a dance floor. As they moved together to the music of a single fiddle, the world beyond their embrace seemed to fade away. For this moment, there was only the two of them and the promise of tomorrow. "Happy?" he asked softly, his breath warm against her ear. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully, his arms tightened around her. "This is just the beginning, Zara, I promise you that," and she believed him. Spring arrived with a rush of green that transformed the land almost overnight. The valley that would be their home burst into life, wildflowers carpeting the meadows, the creek running full with snowmelt, birds returning to build nests in the cottonwoods that lined the water. They had spent the winter months in a small cabin on the Hawkins ranch, saving their wages and planning for the work ahead. Kincaid continued his duties with the horses, while Zara remained in charge of the kitchen. In the evenings, they would pore over rough sketches of their future home, modifying plans as their dreams expanded and practical considerations intervened. By April, they were ready to begin. With the blessing of the Hawkins, who recognized that good neighbors were worth cultivating, Kincaid arranged for several of the ranch hands to help with the building in exchange for future assistance with roundups and cattle drives. The old cabin on their land was beyond repair, useful only for salvaged lumber and the stone from its fireplace. They marked out a new location, closer to the creek but high enough to avoid spring flooding, with a view across the valley that took Zara's breath away each morning. The work was hard but rewarding. Logs were felled, stripped, and notched together to form the walls of a sturdy 4-room cabin. A stone fireplace rose at one end, while glass windows, a luxury Kincaid insisted upon, were set into frames on all 4 sides. A deep porch would eventually wrap around 2 sides, though that would come later. While the men worked on the cabin, Zara tackled the land around it. She marked out a vegetable garden, turning the rich soil and planning for rows of potatoes, beans, corn, and all the produce they would need. She planted a small orchard of apple and cherry trees, knowing it would be years before they bore significant fruit, but determined to build for the future. By June, the cabin was habitable enough for them to move in, though much work remained. Their first night in their own home, they sat on the unfinished porch, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold. "It's not much yet," Kincaid said, his arm around her shoulders, "but it's ours." Zara leaned into his embrace, contentment filling her. It's everything. She didn't tell him then about the suspicion that had been growing alongside their home that their family might be increasing sooner than they had planned. She wanted to be sure before sharing news that would change their lives yet again. As summer progressed, their small ranch began to take shape. Kincaid built a modest barn and corral, then used some of their savings to purchase 4 good brood mares and a gentle stallion, the beginning of the horse breeding operation they had discussed during the winter evenings. Zara's garden flourished under her care, and she began putting up preserves for the winter ahead. When her condition became impossible to hide, she finally shared her news with Kincaid on a warm August evening. His response was everything she could have hoped for, joy that lifted him from his chair to swing her in a gentle circle, followed by concern that he'd been working her too hard, then a solemn promise to build their child a world filled with love and security. "A baby," he said in wonder, his hand resting gently on her still small belly. "Our baby." "In January, the doctor thinks," she confirmed, covering his hand with her own. His eyes, when they met hers, shone with unshed tears. "I never thought I'd have a family of my own," he confessed. "After losing my parents, I just didn't allow myself to want it. And now," she asked softly, his smile was answer enough, but he put it into words anyway. "Now I can't imagine wanting anything else." As autumn painted the valley in russet and gold, their life settled into a rhythm of work and preparation. The cabin was finished properly, the last shingles nailed down, the porch completed, the interior furnished with a mix of handcrafted pieces and items purchased during occasional trips to White River. These visits to town had grown easier over time. Some residents still regarded Zara with suspicion or disdain, but others, impressed by her transformation from beggar to ranch wife, offered cautious friendship. The Hawkins' open support of the young couple helped considerably in changing public opinion. During one such trip in late October, they encountered Martha Wilcox outside the general store. Zara, her pregnancy now visible beneath her coat, felt Kincaid's protective presence beside her as the woman approached. "Mrs. O'Malley," Martha said stiffly, using the married name as if testing its reality. "I hear congratulations are in order." "Thank you," Zara replied with equal formality. An awkward silence stretched between them until Martha spoke again, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. "I was wondering. The church is holding a bazaar next month. We need contributions. I recall your mother made exceptional preserves, if you've carried on the tradition." The olive branch, however ungracefully extended, surprised Zara. "I have some blackberry jam that turned out well. I could spare a few jars." Martha nodded, something like relief flickering across her features. "That would be appreciated." She glanced at Kincaid, who remained watchful but polite. "Your husband's horses are developing quite a reputation. My son expressed interest in purchasing one come spring." "He's welcome to visit the ranch when they're ready," Kincaid offered, his tone neutral. With another nod and a murmured goodbye, Martha continued on her way. As they watched her go, Zara felt a weight lifting she hadn't realized she still carried. "Seems like White River is finally coming around," Kincaid observed. Zara smiled, her hand resting on her growing belly. "Just in time for the next generation." Their son, James Josiah O'Malley, was born on a snowy January night with Sarah Hawkins serving as midwife. He arrived with a lusty cry and a shock of dark hair that made Kincaid laugh with delight. "He's got your spirit," he told Zara as she held their newborn for the first time, exhausted but radiant. "And your stubborn chin," she replied, tracing a finger over the baby's tiny features. Sarah, watching from the doorway, smiled at the new family. "He's perfect," she pronounced before discreetly withdrawing to give them privacy. Kincaid perched carefully on the edge of the bed, his arm encircling Zara as they both gazed at their son. "I never thought I could be this happy," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "When I rode into White River that day, I was just looking for work and land. I never expected to find you." Zara leaned against his shoulder, their child cradled between them. "And I never expected that a desperate trip to the well would lead to all this." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Best water I ever hauled," she laughed softly, remembering how it had all begun with an empty bucket and a heart full of desperation. Now both were filled to overflowing with something she had almost forgotten existed: hope. As winter gave way to spring and spring to summer, their small ranch flourished alongside their family. Kincaid's horses gained recognition throughout the territory, while Zara's garden expanded to include medicinal herbs and flowers as well as vegetables. James grew strong and curious, taking his first steps on the porch where they had sat that first night in their new home. Visitors became more frequent: the Hawkins family, neighboring ranchers, even townsfolk from White River, who gradually accepted that the Blackett girl and the mysterious cowboy had created something worthy of respect. On the second anniversary of their wedding, they stood together on their porch at sunset, watching James toddle after a butterfly in the yard. Kincaid's arm was warm around Zara's waist, his presence as solid and reassuring as the day he had first stepped between her and those who would judge her. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" she asked, leaning into his embrace. "If you hadn't come to White River that day, if you hadn't stopped at the well." He was quiet for a moment, his gaze taking in their home, their land, their child, before returning to her face. "I believe some things are meant to be, Zara. Maybe not in the way preachers talk about fate or providence, but in the way people recognize something true when they find it." His hand tightened on her waist. "I recognized you, even covered in dust with an empty bucket. I knew you were someone who would matter." Tears pricked at her eyes as she turned in his arms to face him fully. "And I recognized you, though I was too afraid to admit it then. The first person in so long to really see me beyond my circumstances." His kiss was tender, a reaffirmation of all they had built together. When they parted, James was tugging at Kincaid's pants leg, arms raised in a clear demand to be picked up. With a laugh, Kincaid swung the boy onto his shoulders, where he crowed with delight at his new vantage point. "Mama," James called, reaching toward Zara. "Up high." "Yes, my love," she agreed, reaching up to steady him, "up very high." As the setting sun painted their valley in shades of amber and rose, Zara looked at her husband and son silhouetted against the darkening sky. From an empty bucket at a town well to this abundance of love and purpose, her journey had been one of both heartbreak and redemption. But standing here now, she wouldn't change a single step of the path that had led her home.